Today's panel, as you might have guessed, takes its name from, and spirit as well, from the fashion film you just experienced. And we're here not only to explore how this biomaterial can be used within the fashion industry, but also how the indigenous community share its culture and care within this amazing biodegradable material. So we're here once again to talk about also everything it touches. So it touches design, it touches ethics, it touches sustainability, and more in general, how we said already, how like the way things can be done differently in fashion and to reshape the future of it. So joining me are 4 people whose work span ethics, design, activism as well. We can start from Veronica.
Hi. Thank you for having me, and what a beautiful film, an inspiration to watch, so thank you for making it. My name is Veronica D'Souza. I do different things, but I think in relevance to this, I had a brand for 6 years where I worked in Peru, actually. I worked with incarcerated women, so women in prison, who are mainly there for poverty-related crimes, and we created a brand together with them based on natural materials from Peru and learning from their knowledge. And just, for information, a lot of the women who are incarcerated are indigenous women who are left out by society and so on. So I have some experience in trying to navigate those complexities of honoring craft, stories, but also translating them so that they can be sold, so that you can make money and make a living. And I think that's the space that's complex, but very important and interesting to talk about. I also do other things, but I think that's the most relevant part for this.
Thank you. We can move on to Rebekka.
Yeah, thank you for having me today. My name is Rebekka Bay. I'm the creative director for Marimekko, the world's oldest lifestyle brand. I oversee ready-to-wear and home product and bags and accessories for Marimekko. But more than just overseeing collections, of course, I also constantly move the brand forward. We have more than 70 years history. We have an archive of 3,500 prints. We have a printing mill in our own headquarters. So, of course, I'm someone who is in my work every day, really sort of curating and honoring a long tradition, a long heritage, and a true craft, the craft or the art of printmaking. But I'm also someone who is extremely curious about how we move fashion forward without damaging people and the planet, and how we do that in a way where we address sustainability also in terms of the life cycle of a product, or the desirability of a product, that a product is not something to be thrown away after a season. So I think that's why I'm here today.
Thank you so much. And then we have Sine with us today as well.
Hello, my name is Sine Christiane Gerstenberg, and I am a fashion journalist, and I write about lifestyle. I've covered fashion for more than 20 years now. And I think what has been one of my main issues has been that very often fashion has fallen into 2 categories. Either it's something that is to be damned, or it's something that is superfluous, and I think neither parts are true. So I have dedicated a lot of my writing to coming up with better ways of educating people, but also giving voice to all the talented, creative people out there who are actually doing a lot to create clothes that last. So that's probably the reason why I'm here today. I've also been quite provoked sometimes by the way that, on the one hand, the fashion industry is told that they are harming the system, but on the other hand, when they try to make progress, it's like it's not fast enough. So I think I feel both like an advocate and a critic at the same time. And I think that it's very important that we don't try to sugarcoat the business, but not attack it either. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And finally, of course, we have Emma.
I won't introduce myself again. You know who I am now, hopefully. But I will say that on this panel, my goal really is to speak on behalf of Rosalia and Doris and the other women in the Awahun community who are not here to speak. When I spoke to them, I had to go through 2 different translators, from English to Spanish, from Spanish to Awahun, and backwards. So from living with them and learning from them, that's my goal today, to kind of give the expression that they would if they were here.
Thank you so much. So before moving on to the questions and the panel talk, I'd like to take also a brief moment to thank Copenhagen Fashion Week for creating such a space for these conversations to happen. Because hopefully Fashion Weeks can shape much more than trends. They can shape priorities, and Denmark has been at the forefront of this sustainable revolution, and it's really important, I believe, to have this kind of discussions. So it's an honor once again to be here to moderate this, and I hope together we can explore not only how SHIRINGA might be used, but also why materials like this matter so much right now. So starting from Emma, talking about fashion system and material ethics, I'd like to ask you if you can walk us maybe through what actually means for you to, so you've called SHIRINGA a total ethics material. So what does this kind of definition mean for you, and how, you know, why you choose also to focus this kind of fashion film here today?
Yeah, so total ethics fashion is a term that I coined when I founded Collective Fashion Justice and that I wrote about in my book. And it came about because I felt a bit tired with this idea where we had ethical fashion on one side and sustainable fashion on the other side as this binary idea. When total ethics fashion is, again, about people, animals, and planet, but more than that, recognizing that we as people are just one of many phenomenal animal species on this planet, and all of us as animals don't just live in nature, we are nature. And so if we are only considering one of those groups, people or animals or the planet, we're ultimately failing all of us, because unless we protect all 3 of those consistently, we won't actually genuinely protect any of us. And so SHIRINGA bioleather, for us, is a material that really beautifully encapsulates that idea. Not only is it animal-free and helping us move beyond using skins as a material, it also supports this community. There's a lot of biomaterials out there, and this is one of the few that has a really strong social impact component, because it supports the Indigenous community not only to have income to support their children, education and nutrition were 2 really important things that they wanted to improve, but it also helps them to defend against deforestation. 80% of that in the Amazon rainforest is for cattle ranching, so fashion and leather has consequences in that, and fossil fuel mining also has consequences in that, and fashion plays a big role. So this community is providing a solution while defending against a problem. And to explain how it works, when a community can prove that they are able to support themselves and work with the forest to create a product, even though there should be just inherent value that means that deforestation doesn't occur, the fact that the community can do that helps the Peruvian government to create a reserve area that is safer against deforestation. So there we really see the people, animals, planet components being not just not harmed, but actively protected. And so that's why we wanted to start this film series with SHIRINGA bioleather.
Thank you so much. So Rebekka, as someone leading the creative direction at a global heritage brand, how are you able to balance material experimentations also with creativity and product durability and price point?
I wish there was just like, oh, that's not a problem. But of course it is a problem. I actually think the biggest shift that has happened in recent years is that the creative process is no longer a creativity first process. It is actually a material first process. So I think the real shift that have happened is that we're looking for material solutions before we even think of design, and then we design into the material instead of designing and then finding materials. I think what's important, and I know it's like, how do we balance all of this? But of course we don't. Yeah, you know, sometimes we need to take margin hits to try something new, or sometimes we need to create different processes in order to integrate, especially new materials. It's a long process normally, and I assume everyone here knows how long processes actually are in fashion, but it takes us sort of from beginning to the product hits the store, normally 18 months, meaning that we of course we work really long in advance, and it's not just because of the product, but it's of course the campaign materials that needs to be created and the shipping and everything. But when it comes to integrating new materials into collections, we work maybe sometimes on timelines that are 24 months, 36 months, 52 months. There's really no fixed timeline because we don't know what we're going to discover. I think it's always interesting to take on new materials, and I would say this is a great project, because I think within Marimekko, but I'm pretty sure for many brands, we're all looking for especially leather alternatives. So materials that have the same properties as leather but are non-animal based. But we don't really understand a material, of course, before it has actually also lived through its own life cycle, because it's not just the materials are not only important to study at the beginning, of course, of the design cycle. What is more important is also to understand their lifespan and how they can be passed on or upcycled, recycled. So I would say that with most of these integrating new materials or diversifying our material base, we develop these alternative timelines that live on top of our normal production line, so that we are not dependent on a specific implementation date for introducing new materials, because that would probably be a disaster. Then, but it probably would, because we don't actually know how the material always behaves.
So Sine, within your experience within like covering the matter, how can brands actually, avoid perpetuating extractive models, even when they are sourcing bio-based or ethical materials?
Well, I think there are several issues that you have to look at. For one thing, it's not only about sourcing the right materials, it also actually have a conscious about who you're sourcing from and who is benefiting. So you can buy a lot of materials that sound like they're ethical because they might be sustainable, but are they also giving back to the local community? And I know this is a big task and a big ask for the designers, so I think this is also a political issue, to be honest. I think there should be more legislation, so it's easier for the designers to find out where are the right places, who can we support. And I think the consumers as well carry a huge responsibility to actually asking for these more responsible ways of producing. For 20 years ago, it was sort of hard in Denmark to demand that people would buy ecological eggs or milk. Now it's just something you expect that should be found on the shelves. And I think with clothing, it shouldn't be up to the consumer to understand necessarily what is the ethical way. It shouldn't be left only to the designers as well. This is a whole system that needs to be reverted. Then also, I think the whole cycle of fashion is carried on seasons and on novelty. So I think the whole pace of the industry needs to slow down as well. It's wonderful to hear that you work so long with the materials. And I think the whole ask for, especially within the media, for always something that's new, something that comes that you can, breaking news, green is the new color, or now we see fake fur, or so that actually we take more time into investigating into what are sustainable designs and what are the sustainable stories we want to bring out. And so that sustainability is not just an add-on, but that's just like the baseline.
Absolutely. So talking about the final consumer and how it's not easy to avoid greenwashing probably. So Veronica, since we've mentioned, how this indigenous community is not only worker of within the forest, but also stewards of it. How can we avoid, romanticizing this kind of indigenous communities and actually, talking about making choices,
I think maybe that's a question that Emma, as a representation of the Iranian community, should also have a chance to answer, but I'll do my best with my perspective. I think we're in this mess of this world not only because of Descartes, but kind of. Man over nature. And in that whole kind of last couple of thousands of years, we've created this hierarchy that nature has the least power, and, I would say indigenous communities have been seen as not as smart or not at the same value, right? At the same time, currently, 80% of the biodiversity that is left in our world is stewarded by the 1% of indigenous communities. So really the wisdom to maintaining our world is held there. And it's very recent, within the last 5 years, that scientists are beginning to listen to indigenous communities as experts. So we're beginning very slowly to see some kind of reverse, very slowly, in the power hierarchy of who is above whom, right? Of course, we're all equals, but who has knowledge that we need to look into, expert knowledge. So I'm not too concerned about romanticizing. I think fashion has its own game. I am concerned about the world. And I'm concerned about appreciating expert knowledge. And I think we cannot do that too little when it comes to indigenous communities. And representing someone else that's different than you is always very tricky. However, that should not hold you back from being interested, curious, and talking about it. So I don't have a lot to say about romanticization. I have a lot to say about how we should just keep talking, even if we say the wrong words, even if we place it in the wrong terms. Let's talk more about who has knowledge, what we can learn, and how we can reverse the hierarchy so that we can unfuck this world, basically.
So Emma, being someone who actually worked super close to this indigenous community, what are the ethical implications of, working with such materials that have a really resonance, cultural resonance, when we are actually bringing this kind of biomaterials within the European or global fashion markets?
I think there's a really important balance. So when I spoke with Doris, with Rosalia, with people in the community, they want their material to be out in the wider fashion industry because it's a way that they can support themselves. And this is just one Awahun community. There are lots of other communities within the Amazon who also, even just a little bit down the river from where we were, would like to do this. But until there is enough engagement from the fashion industry, there is no way that they can. And so we need to be able to scale up production, but equally do so in a way that's responsible. And the best way for us to do it responsibly is to do it on the terms of the people who know how to do it best. And that means a few things. The first is acknowledging that while there is a large capacity to scale, because there are a lot of Shiringa trees, there are a lot of communities that would like to do it, it will be a luxury material because there is a cap at which it becomes unsustainable. And that community knows how to do that. And that's why Kaxkori Studio, the material lab, works with these communities through a conservation agreement that the Indigenous leaders sign with the government before anyone can be involved. And that means that they get to set the terms of reference, they get to set the price, and that's a really important part. It also means that the European fashion industry understands that while they gain something from using this material, both profit but also a better world, which we hopefully all value, it's not their material to use. It's something that they use with the community. And so we've had some engagement with brands where they've asked if they can patent the material, and the answer is absolutely not. It's not your material, it's the community's material, and you're lucky to use it. And it's a solution that they're providing to us, but that they are stewards of. And so I think being mindful of the power imbalances that fashion holds, and the fact that they want you to use the material, but to use it on their terms, and that is not just okay, but the only way forward is a really important thing for brands to keep in mind.
Rebekka, do you see a difference when using this kind of, materials compared to like anonymous global supply chains?
But we don't have an anonymous supply chain. I think it's part of our commitment to sustainability is also traceability. And I think what both Emma and Veronica speaks about is respect and knowledge sharing. And I do think that can happen if you have an anonymous supply chain. So, and it's not to make this project less important, but of course it doesn't matter if it's your yarn supplier or your knitter or your printer, which is also why we have a printing mill in the middle of our headquarters, because for us, the know-how, the knowledge sharing, the real craft is also working with the people directly. So our designers are working with our printing mill employees, or our designers are working with the artists that are creating the prints to understand both where they're coming from, but also to protect the integrity of everything we do. So whether it is and I'm so reluctant to call it bio leather. I think it's such a weird oxymoron. So because I would much rather focus on like this leathers, and you can also have a respectful, sustainable business in leather. We have full traceability and use only Scandinavian hides when we use leather. So we have a very strong relation with our supply chain also in leather. But I think it doesn't really matter what material you're working with if you do not care for the people, the production, the farmland, and again back to also the afterlife of the material. Then it is a very short-sighted, I think, what Sine is saying. Then it becomes this like super fast-turning fashion cycle, which we're all trying to move away from. And it would be hideous to think that you can develop any product of quality and integrity without actually utilizing the knowledge that has been inherited by, from one generation to the next.
Of course. So Emma, in an age where sustainable claims are very vague and misleading sometimes, how do you manage to balance the different types of bio-leather that SHIRINGA creates?
Yeah, so I think transparency, as we've been saying, is the key to doing that. And there are a number of different types of this material that are made, and that's because different brands have different requirements and expectations. And you've been talking about life cycle. I think the big challenge for a lot of brands is the balance between how do we have something completely bio-based and that can readily compost when we want it to, but also last for a really long time across generations. It's an oxymoron. And so different brands prioritize different parts of that differently. And so they have a version of the SHIRINGA material that is 86% bio-based and that then has a water-based polyurethane, and that makes it last longer. But then there's another version that is completely bio-based and it won't last quite as long. That is the trade-off, and brands have to choose, and you have to consider at the end of life of that product, what do you do with it and how does it change based on those things? And labeling that and making it very clear to consumers and making it your responsibility as a brand to do that so people really understand what it is important and should be something, as you were saying, that should be legislated better.
So Rebekka, within your experience in Marimekko, how did the, explaining, how you trace this kind of materials and the transparency within the brand change within the last 10 years?
I think it seems like it's changing every 6 months. I think, and I think we sort of noted on the danger of romanticizing or greenwashing, and of course this is something where we're extremely careful. We really need to balance how we can communicate, but of course we can communicate facts. And that's actually what we're doing. We're not making any promises. We're also not making any forward promises. I have not made a promise to Emma that this will be in the collections next year, because I don't know if I can promise neither to suppliers nor consumers, how or when or how fast we can introduce new materials. But we do communicate. I think a great example is, and I think fashion is also marketing. You know, the product alone cannot communicate. So I think there's also something in really carefully timing and focusing communication. For us, a really good example was we launched circular, sustainable, organic cotton denim last year. And we focused all our communication on that. That was the only message that we communicated over and over and over and over. And we looked at every detail. And of course, we partnered with Ellen MacArthur Foundation in order to make sure that we really understood what we were getting into. And I think that's the key now, instead of sort of communicating vaguely and sort of across everything, to really focus communication on categories or products or materials where you're both sort of showing and telling at the same time. But I think that has changed. I think 5 years ago, everyone was just communicating quite vaguely and sort of across the board.
Absolutely. So, Emma, beyond a buzzword, what does regenerative mean, and how can it reshape supply chains?
Well, for me, I would hope that regenerative fashion is the same as this idea of total ethics fashion. And that means that we ideally have a fashion system that not only does minimal harm, but that can actually benefit. And when we talk about people, animals, planet, for us that also does mean that while we have cyclical relationships with nature, when we use animals in fashion, we don't have a cycle. We have a linear system, just like most of the fashion industry is linear, where we take and we make and then we waste. When we use animals for fashion, we take their life. And we can't really have that cycle, even if it is technically a natural material. So I do think that's a part that is important for us to highlight. And we only touch on it a little bit in the film, but one to mention. But regeneration is, again, a word that has been used in a lot of different ways, and that we do need to legislate. And I know that it is difficult when legislation comes to fashion. There's a lot to keep up with, it's constantly changing, but it's kind of at the point where we need it, because otherwise we aren't sure what we're saying, and consumers are confused. And we've done polling with consumers across the world that shows that they're confused. They have the best of intentions, but they're not necessarily sure. And they increasingly have less trust because of the greenwashing that's occurred previously. But that also doesn't mean that brands should stop trying to communicate. It's really important that we continue to communicate. We just do it precisely.
Right. So, Sine, what would you say it needs to shift culturally to bring SHIRINGAs not as the exception, but as the norm within fashion?
I think there has been it's been sort of weird that we keep thinking that being ethical is either a luxury that you can't afford or something that is terribly hard. And I would again say I think that there really needs to be some political legislation. I don't understand, say in Australia, if you want to buy a packet of cigarettes, I know this because I've been a party smoker.
It's very scary.
It's not only scary, it's very expensive. It's expensive to want to smoke. So that is why you just don't smoke. If you want to ride your bike in Australia, you have to wear a helmet. In Denmark, it's but if you don't feel like wearing the helmet, it's fine. If you really want to have a new t-shirt every single time you go out on Friday, it's fine. So I think that there needs to be really a shift of what is fine. And it's too much to ask the individual to take on the responsibility, especially if there's a peer pressure to keep up with trends. So I think there is a political issue here. Really need to say that doing the right thing should be not overly expensive. Doing the wrong thing should be very expensive. We've just seen cases with Shein in Italy and in France where they've been fined largely. I have a 10-year-old girl who is just dying to get Shein. She's not allowed, but this is just because this is what all her peers do. So I think we should make it not only very uncool, it should also be very expensive to act in the wrong way. Now, coming from a journalistic side, I also think we should stop saying that there should be 6 collections a year and that each collection should have 50 different styles in order for us to even care, in order for us to even consider showing this. So there should be way more focus on highlighting the ones that really make an effort. the ones that make covetable designs that last. And it's not easy, but it's not impossible. We've seen it. Everyone wants to wear a pair of blue jeans. Everybody wants to wear a pair of Chuck Taylors. There's a lot of items. The Marimekko flower is a perfectly good example of this. So I think if we slow down, we get fewer and better things, and things that actually fit our shape. We can have time to actually say, I will hold on to this pair of jeans because they fit me well, and I paid quite a lot of money for them because they were ethically made. And so I cannot afford to throw them out. They need to last quite a few, more than a few years.
Absolutely. So, Rebekka, what's the role, would you say, of legacy brands and fashion education in making space to such materials that, although they challenge, the fashion world, they might also be complex to work with?
I think there is a real danger of, I think that it's very easy to create a narrative that would be that fashion doesn't actually want to be better, or that fashion designers or fashion students doesn't want to do better, or slow down, or work into new materials, because they all do, we all do, most of us, I think, because I cannot speak for everyone in fashion, but most of us are extremely concerned with how can we do less, make less, how can we make it better, how can we make better qualities, how can we understand better what looks good on people, on real people, how can we make things that look good on many different people, so that we don't have to make one dress for everyone, but we can make one dress for everyone. That's what I'm most concerned with, yeah. But of course, I think already I can see Ilse Skjold is here, and she's a real advocate for also material innovation in fashion education. And I think it is important that we work together, fashion education or design education and the industry, because I think, of course, we want to educate new talent that will educate us, because I think there's a really good point. If you have worked in the fashion industry for more than 10, 20 years, I'm one of those, I need to be constantly re-educated, and I can only be re-educated if I continue to bring in new talent or newly educated designers or creators or material developers. So I think now there is a real focus in fashion education that is also textile or material education. And I think there's a new focus on how one understand materials better. Of course, I hope, and maybe this is a really personal hope, but I hope that we don't end up assuming that everyone should be good at everything and everyone should know everything. I think this is the one, that's why I'm also looking at Ilse, because we have discussed this, because I'm a little bit worried if we flatten education, because we should all be experts in everything, instead of actually making us experts and really deep experts, or giving us deep knowledge into something, and then allowing us to work together to become experts across a lot of things. So my hope is really that fashion education will also now find its way in this, and sort of find a way where we still allow this like real knowledge building, so that we're not, because also I know in this panel it's so interesting when we talk about designers being responsible, but hey, we sit as a designer. I'm a creative director, yeah. I have this design team, design directors and designers and design assistants and product developers and pattern makers, and there's so many people, there's so much different expertise going into designing a good product, and it's never a design decision. Balancing, creating, long-lasting, high-quality, beautiful product that takes an army. Yeah, there's so many people and so many decisions going into that, and that is rarely a design decision. That is rarely a creative decision. So I think legislation is one way, but it's also really us understanding what is the knowledge needed for us to address this holistically and 360, and not assume that one individual. And I think that's the concern, if we expect one individual to be knowledgeable in all these different fields.
So Veronica, to close, if we were to imagine like a fashion collection just made entirely of SHIRINGA? What would it need to represent beyond material innovation? And above all, how do we get there?
So I think the first thing I would add to that is that it shouldn't be a collection. I think that word should be pretty much erased and deleted for how we talk about fashion when it comes to what's okay and what's not okay. And I just want to add, because we talked about kind of sustainability all the way around a little bit here, we didn't talk so much about the root causes of that. And maybe all of you do, maybe not everyone does, but the root cause, at least from my perspective, is the business model of fashion, right? So when you go into a store and there's a collection, I mean, of course it depends on the brand, but between 20 and 40% of that collection will be sold. The rest will not. It might be sold in outlets or so on, but it's just to say, in order to have a profit margin that can actually pay for that, there will be a constant search for cheaper materials, cheap labor, etc. So, the SHIRINGA material should never be a collection. We should think of things that don't lose value, and I really think of clothes are not milk. Like, they don't go bad. So if we think of that as a value that we have, it is also an economic value. And that's why at the bottom line of all of this is, of course, the economy. And we cannot talk about the fashion system as not part of the economic system. It is, right? So it's how we give value to that. So I would start with that. The SHIRINGA worth will be there in expression, not as a collection. What will bring it to life? Was that the second part of the question?
Yeah, how do we get there? It was
how do we get there?
Yeah.
I think we get there by making space. I think with age, I have become a bit more radical. I think I've sat through my 20 years within, like, come from sustainability and business and all of that. I think I've sat through my 20 years of like, yeah, we're trying, we're getting there. At least from my tempo and the world that I want to see and the tempo it's going in decay, I don't think that these small incremental pushes is going to get us there, to be honest. So that's not a very uplifting answer, but maybe what we could do is think of it like a comet. I think we need to, in terms of climate and everything else, I do think we need to, in our world, which is difficult for us, come to terms with that we will have to, for a period of time, have less than we have now. I think we need to do that for like 20 years. And if we give space, buy less, do less, consume less, make less, maybe have less. And that's hard for us as humanity because we thought we should have more. So that's difficult. But I think if we come to terms with that grief of having less, maybe there will be space for something like SHIRINGA. And maybe the questions wouldn't be about the ethics and the concerns about how you translate that, but the ethics of what we're doing now and how we can even uphold that. So have space, do less, and then maybe things like SHIRINGA will be valued for what it does and contributes.
Thank you. Thank you everyone, and thank you especially to our panelists today. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your openness. Before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to invite you as well to experience the clothes we have just outside this space. We have, for instance, Marimekko designs with SHIRINGA Violetta. And also I would like to add that if you are ready to take the next step, feel free to talk with Emma or visit the Collective Fashion Justice website. We can move on, I guess, to the Q&A. So if you want to raise your hand, we are here to reply to any questions you might have, any doubt. We are going to share a microphone with you. Yeah, is there?
I'll just sing out. I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously there'd be the issue with the language barrier when you're speaking with the Indigenous people. How did you navigate the language barrier and the cultural barriers that you had to deal with when you went?
We allocated a whole day to working that out at first because, I mean, we had had Zoom calls and lots of Zoom calls beforehand with the people at Kaxkori Studio that visit the community regularly, and also with Jessica, who is a community leader who goes between the community and somewhere on the border of the rainforest where there's internet access. So we had had a lot of that. We had had a lot of back and forth where literally a boat would go 4 hours to bring the thoughts to the community and then backwards for months and months before I got there. And then once we were there, we had to work out even just the granular detail of how many words should I say for them to actually get to the other person and backwards. So at first, I would hear a really long reply from Doris, and then I'd have a sort of short reply back, and I was like, that can't possibly be it. Like, I need every single word that she says is every single word that I hear. And so we spoke in tiny little bits, which takes a long time but is important, because you do lose so much in translation unless you were really careful. And that was the whole point, that every word in the film was a word that had been said with intention, not me thinking this is what I want them to say. And so the same thing happened with the back and forth after the film was made. Was this the right translation after all? Quite a few changes happened even still after that, so it just took time. Go for it. Our friend in the back. Do one of you want to take that?
It's a common question, I know, but it's just that I'm just really nervous about all this materials talk. We've been talking about sustainable materials for 15 years, and still the volume is just going one way, and that is up. So it's not going to work just stripping one material for the other.
Which I think one thing on that is when we've done our reports on the impacts of the current leather industry, we've always ended it with, there's not going to be one material that replaces what we're currently using. There will be a variety of materials that are maybe geographically specific to different parts of the fashion industry, but that also, research shows that we are producing fourfold more than we can within planetary boundaries and producing fourfold more waste than we can afford. So we are not aiming for these new materials to replace the current scale. We have to think about how we produce them less. And that comes into what we've been saying here, but it also, I think, could be a positive because there is all this discussion of how will we be able to afford to scale it up. We don't have to, maybe. And I really liked what you were saying about coming to accept less. And I think on that is when we have less, how can we kind of reframe this idea? Because degrowth is a scary word in fashion. How can we reframe it that when we have less, when we make less, we actually have space for more creativity and for a better life for everyone?
I also have to just add one more thing. I also think we really, both as media and just in general, also at a school like yours, we have a big responsibility to stop the genuine narrative in the consumer base where people feel like they should get value for money and now they should get values for money. And I really think if you could start implementing that idea, because we have it in so many other ways. We have a young generation who are very alert, really want to do the right thing, but it's just difficult within the fashion scape because we've not taken that part into it. So I think we really need to make values sexy, not like a lifted finger. And we've talked a lot about it. If you get something that you really want to wear and that you love and you feel good in, and it's not sexy any longer to wear the newest thing, I think we would also make your job a lot easier if it's like sexy to wear valuable clothing, not just getting lots and lots of news and news and news.
My job is actually pretty easy. But I just want to add, I don't think and of course, again, I can only speak on behalf of the brand I'm working for. I don't expect designers to understand sustainable versus non-sustainable. I assume that they come informed, and I assume that sustainability is a hygiene factor when we're thinking of materials. But we are more and more focusing on, and I think maybe this is also one of the shifts, we are talking less now about sustainability, not that we care less, but we're talking much more about material diversification. Because I think if we all focus on replacement, I think it's a really good point, then we just end up exhausting something else. So what we're focusing on, and of course I will agree to the less, and I think we have brands that are really concerned with how do we do better and less, and how do we get out of this trend or newness cycle. I think a lot of brands are also focusing on monomaterials and not collections. I think it's a really good point. If we can, if we can also sort of diverse our material base, but also work more into few materials, because they can then stay with us for a longer time, for more collections. We still make collections, but I think what is important is that we understand that we need to work across many different materials, and they have different properties, so that we don't end up exhausting one material. I think a good case was cotton. There was cotton, and then there was organic cotton, and then and we actually ended up exhausting sort of organic cotton as a material, because we were not concerned with what are the other materials that can also sort of fill the need that we normally seek from cotton.
Can I add something too? I just wanted to add as well, I sometimes feel in conversations about ethics and sustainability and fashion, you can kind of get stuck in between either figuring out how do you still work for the industry? Like, how do you make sure that you don't lose jobs, or that designers have work, or that we still sell products, right? That's, of course, one conversation. But that's not the conversation that I'm particularly interested in. I'm okay if parts of how we run this world will not exist. And I think that's what I mean by loss. So if you want to shift, I think it's actually really important to talk about what kind of design practice, what kind of collective imagining are we helping each other to learn? Because I believe that there has been, there is such a huge need for creativity right now. There is such a huge need for design. But maybe more than product, it's systems, or it's stories. As you said, like when you connect with, the brand that we had, I was really inspired by, grandmothers who, if they knit something for you, it might still not, it can be your favorite piece, it can also not. But like if someone has put effort into spending a week, I remember speaking to a grandmother and she was like, I was thinking about my grandchild for this whole week while I was knitting this sweater. And when you get a product like that, you don't just throw it out. And if you're kind of done with using it, you pass it on. And so I think the storytelling of how we care matters to us, and there's so much joy in it. There's so much joy into listening to this way of thinking about the world, right? And so that jacket will mean something totally different. So I am totally pro marketing, but I mean storytelling. If we can get back to really sharing stories that matter, that connects with our heart, I think that will help us to not feel that we are losing things, but that we're gaining things. I don't know if that makes sense.
We sadly do not have time for more questions, because we want you to have time to look at the products, to explore the exhibition, to eat, to drink,